I think my mother did exactly the right thing. I think it's absolutely extraordinary.
King Charles believed he understood every rule governing his own household. Then a senior court official placed a sealed precedence file before him and quietly explained that, within a crucial area of palace authority, Princess Anne ranked above Queen Camilla. Charles did not answer. He read the same paragraph twice, removed his glasses, and stared across the table as the consequences of that revelation began tearing through everything he thought he controlled. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles lowered his eyes to the document, searching for a sentence that might weaken its meaning. None appeared. The precedence file, a record explaining who holds authority in royal situations, stated that Anne possessed senior control in ceremonial disputes, restricted palace access, and decisions tied to Queen Elizabeth II's private legacy. It did not remove Camilla's position as queen. It did something more dangerous. It drew a boundary around her power. The king set the file down. A second later, he snatched it back. His accession had made him sovereign, and his marriage had placed Camilla beside him. Yet this protocol had survived the events untouched. Charles felt the insult before he understood the threat. If his wife learned that Anne could overrule her over family possessions, private rooms, and ceremonial privileges, every insecurity Camilla had buried beneath duty would return. The palace secretary watched his expression change and broke the silence through a documented briefing note attached to the file. Queen Elizabeth had personally approved the protocol and ordered its preservation during the transition between reigns. The transition meant the managed transfer of authority from one monarch to the next. Yet no official could explain why Charles had never been warned that his mother's instruction still carried force inside his palace. Charles turned another page and froze. Anne's initials appeared beside two rulings. His sister had not merely known about the authority, she had already used it, quietly and without seeking praise. One decision had blocked access to a private collection. Another had settled a ceremonial disagreement before it reached him. Anne had been protecting a power Charles did not know existed. The king closed the file with both hands and gave a single order. Anne must be brought to him before Camilla heard one word. But beyond the closed door, an aide was already crossing the corridor toward the queen consort's apartments. As Charles prepared to confront the sister who had known the truth all along, Camilla was only moments away from discovering that the palace hierarchy she trusted had never been as secure as she believed. The crisis was never only about rank. For Charles, it threatened his authority as sovereign and husband. For Camilla, it reopened years of insecurity she believed the crown had finally silenced. And for Anne, it forced a private duty into the open, a duty she had carried without applause, affection, or permission. Before the confrontation could begin, each of them stood alone, fearing a different kind of loss. Charles remained beside the closed file, knowing the choice before him could wound either his wife or his sister. As monarch, he was expected to defend the rules that kept the crown stable. As Camilla's husband, he had spent years shielding her from another public humiliation. The newly revealed protocol, a standing palace rule that directs authority in sensitive household disputes, placed those loyalties against each other with brutal precision. Camilla received the message without warning. Her access to a private royal collection meeting had been postponed until Anne gave approval. The collection was not merely a group of valuable objects. It contained personal possessions, letters, and ceremonial pieces connected to Queen Elizabeth II's private legacy. Camilla asked her aide why the Princess Royal's consent was suddenly necessary. The woman hesitated. That pause told the Queen Consort everything. Anne heard the summons minutes later. She did not protest, and she did not ask what Charles had learned. Instead, she removed her gloves slowly and told Timothy Lawrence that the king had finally discovered the arrangement. Her husband studied her face, but she offered no further explanation. For decades, she had treated tradition as a safeguard, not a prize. And now the duty she had carried in silence was about to be judged as defiance. William was briefed through a confidential succession note because the dispute touched the future royal order and control of the late Queen's private archive. The archive was the protected collection of personal records preserved for future sovereigns and historians. He read the note twice, then chose not to call his father. Any advice from the future king could look like support for Anne or an attack on Camilla. Camilla remembered another refusal. Months earlier, Anne had quietly stopped her request to move a private collection before a state reception. At the time, the Queen had dismissed it as coldness. Now she understood that her sister-in-law had been exercising hidden authority. Camilla rose before her aide could stop her. Neither woman intended to arrive second or unprepared. At the same moment, Anne began walking toward the king's study. The palace corridors were carrying both women toward the same man, but only one of them understood the rule that had placed them on a collision course. The protocol had not surfaced by accident. Its return could be traced to one ceremony 6 weeks earlier, when a single chair was moved inside Buckingham Palace and an entire room fell silent. At the time, the incident was dismissed as a minor disagreement over positioning. In reality, it became the point of no return the moment Anne decided that a forgotten safeguard could no longer remain hidden. Camilla had entered the rehearsal expecting a routine final check before the private Commonwealth reception. The gathering was meant to bring senior royals, diplomats, and representatives of royal charities together under one roof. The Commonwealth reception, a formal event involving nations historically linked to the crown, carried more than ceremonial weight because every seat, entrance, and greeting signaled authority. Her staff had already requested that she be placed at the head of the restricted family council table. Camilla stopped when she saw Anne's name card ahead of hers. The position was not accidental. That chair had traditionally belonged to the person responsible for protecting Queen Elizabeth II's private patronages and ceremonial instructions. Those patronages were organizations personally supported by the late monarch, while the instructions governed how certain private royal duties continued after her death. Anne still held that responsibility, even though few people understood its full reach. Camilla asked the equerry to move the card. The equerry, a royal officer responsible for assisting senior family members during formal duties, refused without written approval. She repeated the request more firmly. He refused again. Her voice cooled, and the room seemed to tighten around the disagreement. Anne arrived moments later and immediately understood what had happened. She did not raise her voice. She picked up Camilla's name card, returned it to its original place, and said that certain responsibilities could not be rearranged for appearances. The words were controlled, but the meaning was unmistakable. Camilla was queen, yet Anne still held authority over this part of the palace order. Camilla left the rehearsal furious and wounded. Within hours, she submitted a formal request asking Charles to confirm that her position overrode Anne's in every palace setting. The request placed the king in danger without him yet knowing it, because approving it would have erased a safeguard his mother had deliberately preserved. Anne acted before the request reached a final decision. She sent the household office a copy of Queen Elizabeth's protocol, forcing officials to brief Charles on the hidden hierarchy. The household office was the palace administration responsible for managing royal duties, staff, and internal rules. Charles then learned that his sister had kept the document from him for years. That silence now carried its own accusation. Had Anne protected him from conflict, or had she waited until Camilla crossed a line that could no longer be ignored? The moved chair had become more than a ceremonial insult. It was now the evidence at the heart of a family reckoning that neither Charles nor Camilla could escape. Charles refused to allow the dispute to spread through whispers. He ordered Anne and Camilla into his private sitting room, dismissed every aide, and closed the door himself. For several seconds, nobody sat down. The king held the protocol in one hand, while his wife and sister stood on opposite sides of the room. Then Camilla asked the question Charles had been dreading. "Did you know she could overrule me?" Charles did not answer immediately. He explained that the protocol applied only to specific matters involving Queen Elizabeth II's private legacy, restricted traditions, and protected palace customs. A protocol was a formal rule, guiding how authority operated inside the royal household. Anne did not outrank Camilla everywhere, but in those narrow areas, her decision came first. That distinction offered no comfort. To the queen consort, a hidden limit was still a limit. Camilla turned toward Anne with anger sharpened by humiliation. She accused her of watching silently while she entered rooms, made requests, and spoke with confidence, never knowing that permission might already belong to someone else. Her voice tightened as she asked how many times she had unknowingly depended on Anne's approval. The Princess Royal did not look away. She said the responsibility had been given directly by their mother and had never been intended as a public weapon. Charles turned on his sister. He demanded to know why she had said nothing after his accession, the moment when he became sovereign, following the previous monarch's death. Anne answered without hesitation. He had been grieving, defending Camilla, and struggling to hold the family together. Any warning from her would have sounded like an attack on his wife, and she believed he would have rejected the message before understanding it. Anne then revealed the deeper reason through a private recorded conversation preserved in the late Queen's household archive. Elizabeth had feared repeated attempts to blur the line between a monarch's spouse and the crown's inherited responsibilities. The crown meant the enduring institution of monarchy, separate from personal marriage or affection. She had created the safeguard so duties built over decades could not be reassigned simply to ease tension. Camilla asked the question that cut deepest. Had Elizabeth distrusted her personally? Anne refused to offer false comfort. She said their mother trusted service proven over time more than authority gained through marriage. The words landed with brutal force. Charles placed the protocol on the table and declared that he would decide whether it remained valid. Anne answered quietly that the choice might not legally or constitutionally belong to him alone. Charles had entered the room expecting to settle a family dispute, but her warning revealed that a power greater than personal preference was already moving behind the palace walls. The king's first instinct was simple: amend the rule, protect his wife, and end the humiliation. But the palace legal advisor delivered an answer that stopped him cold. The protocol was tied to private property trusts, legacy custodianship, and formal undertakings made before his accession. Charles could challenge it, but he could not erase it with a signature. For the first time, the crown on his head could not give him the outcome he wanted. Charles stood with his back to the advisors as they explained why the rule had survived. Queen Elizabeth II had connected it to several private trusts controlling personal jewels, handwritten letters, ceremonial objects, and restricted rooms outside normal household authority. A private trust was a legal arrangement created to protect specific property and control who could manage it. Changing the protocol could therefore disturb far more than one seating dispute. Anne had been named senior family custodian because she was already carrying these duties during her mother's final years. A custodian was the person formally responsible for protecting property, records, and instructions for the future. Her role had not begun after Elizabeth's death. It had grown slowly through years of service, giving the arrangement continuity beyond a single reign and making it harder for Charles to dismiss as an outdated preference. William entered the briefing after the legal summary had begun. The prince immediately saw the strain in his father's posture. Charles asked whether Anne should keep the authority, but the future king did not answer quickly. He knew the question was not truly about his aunt. It was about whether loyalty to Camilla could justify overturning Elizabeth's final safeguards. William finally said that changing the rule now would look like punishment. Anne had carried out the late queen's instructions without seeking attention, and removing her only after Camilla challenged the hierarchy would make the decision appear personal. Charles turned away again. His son's answer was calm, but it left him more isolated. The legal advisor then delivered the most dangerous warning. Removing Anne would not automatically transfer her authority to Camilla. Several responsibilities could pass directly to William under the existing trust conditions, leaving the queen consort with even less influence than before. Charles had wanted to protect his wife. Instead, one careless decision could deepen her humiliation. Charles asked whether his sister had ever used the protocol publicly against Camilla. The advisor answered through a documented review of previous rulings. Every intervention had been handled quietly. Anne had avoided embarrassment each time. The present crisis had surfaced only because Camilla submitted a formal challenge. Charles requested one night before deciding. Yet as he left, an aide informed him that Camilla had withdrawn from the upcoming Legacy Council meeting. The rule had survived the king's first attempt to challenge it, and now her retreat threatened to turn a private limitation into a visible royal fracture. The first consequence arrived without an announcement. Camilla's chair remained empty at a meeting she had spent months preparing to attend. Her folder was still placed on the table, her water glass untouched, and Anne sat across from the vacant space without comment. Yet everyone in the room understood what the absence meant. The queen had chosen withdrawal over appearing beneath the woman who now possessed the authority to stop her. Anne opened the meeting with the calm discipline expected of her, but the empty chair changed the atmosphere. The discussion concerned Queen Elizabeth II's personal patronages and the future display of privately owned ceremonial objects. Patronages were charities and organizations formally supported by a royal figure, while ceremonial objects were items used in important royal traditions. Under the protocol, Anne presided over those matters, and Charles remained outside the final decisions. Camilla's staff described her absence as a scheduling conflict. No one believed it. Senior courtiers knew she had withdrawn only after learning that Anne would occupy the leading seat. The explanation protected her publicly, but inside the palace, the truth moved quickly. The queen consort had refused to enter a room where her limits would be visible. Camilla sat alone before Annabel Elliot arrived. She removed the brooch she had intended to wear and returned it to its case with trembling control. Her sister asked whether she wanted the meeting rearranged. Camilla answered that no new schedule could erase what had happened. The palace, she said, had reminded her that she could wear the crown and still be treated as temporary. Annabel tried to reassure her, but Camilla would not accept easy comfort. She had endured years of criticism to reach Charles's side, and now one hidden rule had revived the fear that acceptance could vanish whenever tradition demanded it. Her anger was real, but the sadness beneath it was deeper. Anne noticed the untouched glass before the meeting ended. She did not celebrate Camilla's absence. Instead, she quietly asked an aide whether the queen was unwell. The question exposed a concern she had concealed beneath duty, though she refused to leave her responsibility merely to soften the tension. A staff member photographed the empty place setting before the room was cleared. The image remained inside the palace, but its existence threatened everything. One leak could turn private pain into public spectacle. Charles visited Camilla later and found her silent near the window. She told him she would not ask him to destroy his mother's wishes, but she could not keep entering rooms where everyone knew Anne could overrule her. The king left without promising a solution. Instead, he sent his sister a handwritten request for a private meeting at Windsor. With Camilla retreating and the palace beginning to notice, Charles turned away from legal arguments and prepared to ask Anne the one question only a brother could ask. At Windsor, Charles and Anne met without aids, documents, or ceremonial formality. He arrived first and waited beside the fireplace. She entered, closed the door, and remained standing until he asked her to sit. For once, he did not speak as king. He spoke as a brother who felt caught between the wife he had promised to protect and the mother whose final judgment still governed the family from beyond the grave. Charles asked what Elizabeth had truly intended when she created the protocol. He did not want another legal explanation. He wanted the human reason behind the rule. The protocol was a formal palace safeguard, controlling specific duties, possessions, and decisions. Anne answered that their mother had feared future monarchs might confuse affection with stewardship, the responsibility of protecting royal history for those who came next. Anne said Elizabeth never wanted private letters, heirlooms, patronages, or ceremonial instructions, reassigned simply to calm family tension. Their mother had watched emotion influence judgment before, and she wanted one boundary that marriage, rank, and pressure could not easily erase. The safeguard was not designed to punish Camilla. It was designed to survive everyone. Charles finally admitted what he had resisted saying aloud. Every restriction placed on Camilla carried him back to the years when their relationship had been condemned, mocked, and treated as a threat to the monarchy. He had promised himself that once she stood beside him as queen, he would never allow her to feel unprotected again. Failing to defend her now felt dangerously close to abandoning her. Anne softened. She told her brother that defending Camilla did not require destroying every boundary around her. The queen's dignity could be protected without pretending that marriage transferred responsibilities earned through decades of service. Anne reminded him that Camilla's place beside the sovereign was secure. What remained separate was not love, but duty. Anne then made an offer Charles had not expected. She would step back from the most visible parts of the council and allow Camilla greater ceremonial prominence, provided the custodial authority remained unchanged. Custodial authority meant the power to protect and manage responsibilities entrusted by the late monarch. Anne would surrender recognition, but not the duty itself. Charles understood at last. His sister was not fighting to stand above his wife. She was willing to disappear from the praise while still carrying the burden. The conflict had never been driven by jealousy. It had been driven by loyalty. Charles asked whether Anne would sit beside Camilla at the next council meeting. She agreed, but only if he told his wife the full truth himself. The private agreement gave Charles a path forward, but before he could unite the family, the hidden crisis escaped the palace and exploded before the world. By sunrise, the secret was no longer confined to palace corridors. A national newspaper published the photograph of Camilla's empty chair beneath a massive headline, "Anne above the Queen." Television studios abandoned their planned broadcasts, crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, and commentators began arguing over blood, marriage, service, and power. A private family wound had become a national judgment, and every expression at the palace was now being examined for signs of defeat. The leaked image showed Anne seated before the untouched place reserved for Camilla. No argument appeared in the photograph. No angry words were captured. Yet the empty chair became more powerful than any confrontation, because it suggested absence, rejection, and a hierarchy hidden from the public. A household protocol was an internal royal rule, controlling authority in specific palace matters. But the morning debate quickly transformed it into a question about who truly carried influence. Camilla saw the front page during breakfast and pushed it away before reaching the second paragraph. The Queen Consort was not most frightened by the headline. She feared that Charles would now be forced to choose publicly between his wife and his sister. A private compromise could have protected everyone. A national spectacle demanded a winner and a loser. Anne faced cameras outside a scheduled engagement later that morning. Reporters shouted questions about whether she outranked Camilla and whether the late queen had deliberately restricted her sister-in-law. She paused, controlled her expression, and answered only that service to the crown was never a competition between members of the family. The crown meant the enduring institution of monarchy, separate from the feelings of any one royal. Anne then continued with the engagement, refusing to turn Camilla's pain into personal victory. Charles rejected the first palace response placed before him. One statement defended Camilla's status as queen. Another explained Anne's custodial duties, meaning her responsibility to protect certain possessions, traditions, and instructions. Issuing both would make the household appear split into rival camps. The king knew that words written by officials could not repair a wound created by silence. William urged his father to stop hiding behind statements. The prince argued that Charles must appear with both women and prove that rank and duty could exist together without humiliating either of them. The future king warned that absence would allow the headline to become the permanent truth. Charles made his decision. He ordered the next Legacy Council meeting to continue as planned and opened the arrival courtyard to cameras. Camilla would attend. Anne would sit beside her. The empty chair had exposed the fracture. Now Charles would use the same room, the same table, and the same two women to deliver his final verdict. The answer came not through a decree, but through a carefully chosen act. Charles entered the Legacy Council room, with Camilla on one side and Anne on the other. The chairs had been arranged differently this time, not to hide the protocol, but to acknowledge both women without diminishing either. As the doors closed behind them, the king finally understood that protecting his wife and honoring his sister did not have to become opposing duties. Charles began by confirming that Anne would retain the custodial authority entrusted to her by Queen Elizabeth II. Custodial authority meant the formal responsibility to protect specific traditions, possessions, and instructions for the future. The protocol would remain in force because it governed defined duties. It did not declare his sister generally superior to Camilla, nor did it weaken the queen's public place beside the sovereign. The king also created a clear ceremonial role for Camilla within the Legacy Council, the family body responsible for preserving the late monarch's personal royal work. She would participate visibly, speak with full dignity, and receive the respect owed to her position. Yet she would not take control of the responsibilities Anne had earned through decades of service. Charles spoke privately to Camilla before the meeting began. He apologized for allowing uncertainty and silence to deepen fears she had carried for years. The Queen Consort admitted that she had treated every restriction as proof that the palace still rejected their marriage. Now she understood that the boundary concerned responsibility, not love, acceptance, or her place beside him. Camilla then turned to Anne. She acknowledged that she had mistaken guarded duty for personal hostility. The Princess Royal accepted her own share of blame, admitting that silence had allowed suspicion to grow where honest words might have prevented the crisis. Anne pulled out the chair beside her instead of the one across the table. Camilla accepted it. Charles placed Elizabeth's protocol between them, not as a weapon, but as the document defining how two different forms of authority could exist together. The king publicly confirmed the final truth. Camilla remained queen. Anne remained the senior guardian of traditions entrusted through service. Neither woman had defeated or replaced the other because their responsibilities came from different sources. The crisis proved that monarchy survives when affection respects duty rather than destroying its boundaries. Charles protected his wife without erasing his mother's judgment. Camilla found security by accepting the truth. Anne preserved her responsibility without turning it into triumph. There would be no hidden appeal or revenge. The chairs remained side by side, the protocol remained in force, and the family left united by a truth none could avoid again. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.